Okay, hello and good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Indigenous Vision Symposium. My name is Jocelyn Bell, and I'm the editor and publisher of Broadview. And co-hosting tonight with me is Reverend Murray Pruden, the guest editor of Broadview's September 2022 issue.
And Tanse, hello and welcome everyone. Working behind the scenes to help us out tonight is Chloe Tejada, Broadview's assistant digital editor. And we're so happy to see so many people here tonight. Tawau, welcome.
I'm speaking to you from the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat, the original owners and custodians of this land. Today, Toronto is home to many, including a diverse urban Indigenous community of Inuit, First Nation, and Métis.
And I'm Cree Nihiel from Treaty 6 territory, originally from Goodfish Lake Saddle Lake First Nations in central northeast Alberta. But I am also speaking to you from the traditional territories as mentioned by Jocelyn.
So just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. As you probably realized when you logged in, we are recording this session so we can share this event with others. If you're uncomfortable with your thumbnail video appearing on this recording, please turn off your video now. Also, please mute your audio or we may mute it for you. And I also recommend that you use the speaker view rather than the gallery view. There's a spot to change that in the top right corner of your screen.
This evening, we're going to hear from Nevada Lynn, Suzanne Nerberg, David Kim Craig, all of whom contributed to the Indigenous Vision issue of Broadview. We'll also hear from Alexandra Chimot and Andrew Reuben, the director and subject of a short documentary called Dreaming in Cree, which Broadview produced as a companion video to the special edition of the magazine.
Two final notes before we begin. In order to give our wonderful speakers our undivided attention, we're actually going to encourage you to not use the general chat function tonight. As your hosts, we're going to be able to post messages to the whole group. But if you're wanting to send a question to one of our presenters, we ask that you send it directly to Murray or to me, and we'll give you those instructions as we go through. That would just make it less distracting for all of us and, just give our full attention to the people that we have here this evening. And we really do hope that you'll ask questions. When we get to the Q&A, Chloe will post our instructions and we do have some questions ready, but this is your time to spend with our speakers and we'll have a much more vibrant conversation if there's lots of participation. Second, hearing about Indigenous experiences and stories can be distressing and awaken memories of past traumatic experiences and abuse. Chloe is going to post the numbers for helplines should anyone need support as a result of tonight's event.
So without further ado, let's get started. So tonight, to start off, we have Nevada Lynn, and is a Cree Métis from her maternal line, and an artist in Whistler, BC, British Columbia, whose work incorporates digital art and printmaking. On her website, she describes herself as an activist whose work is largely defined by a commitment to examine issues relating to social and climate justice. In our September issue, Nevada beautifully illustrated our Touchstones feature, in which 4 Indigenous writers shared what nourishes their spirits. So welcome to the symposium, Nevada Lynn.
Thank you, Murray. It's so nice to see your smile and put a name to a face for everyone here. Thank you to everyone that joined us. It's so nice to see this event well attended. I wrote out my talk tonight, and I do introduce myself in the talk as well. So there's a little bit of overlap there, but I'll just get started. Hello, everyone. I am a Métis artist living and working on the unceded territories of the Lillooet Nation and the Squamish Nation in Whistler, BC. I currently work as a freelance digital artist while studying visual art at Emily Carr University of Art and Design on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam Nation, the Squamish Nation, and the Tsleil-Waututh Nation in Vancouver. I give land acknowledgements to remind us to support and honor the emotional and physical labor that Indigenous communities are doing to protect the waters and steward the lands that we live on as guests. When we hear land acknowledgements, we can ask ourselves how we are living in reciprocity with Indigenous communities who are bound by traditional teachings to care for the land. I would like to thank all the good people at Broadview Magazine for inviting me here today and for the work they're doing to understand Indigenous ways of being and seeing. I was delighted when Carol Moscott, the art director of Broadview, wrote me a letter asking if I would like to illustrate a selection of essays reflecting the spiritual perspectives and practices of Indigenous writers across Canada for the Indigenous Vision issue of Broadview. In my mind, this is the spirit of living in reciprocity with First People. As a Métis woman with European ancestry, this is the work that I want to do. So I gratefully gave Carol a resounding yes to this assignment. I read the essays written by Susan, Harlan, Kaylee, and Sheila, and let their words sink into my subconscious, which is how I like to work. It's best if I give ideas a chance to percolate without too much overt intervention from me. I think of myself as a conduit for creative expression rather than a source. Spending time on the land gives me a chance to simply be while remaining open to what I think of as divine intervention. In the early morning, I make my way to the water's edge and slip into the cool water regardless of the season. In summer, I'm able to paddle first, and I gingerly make my way around nesting sites, geese, mergansers, and sometimes a blue heron on my paddleboard while following the shoreline on Alpha Lake. Sometimes in the afternoon, I will take time to lay down on a spongy patch of moss amongst the pine and spruce and watch the clouds go by, or head out for a trail run in the hills that overlook my town. This is all part of being an artist, living a balanced life that includes unstructured time and a relationship with the land. More often than not, this is when creative ideas come to mind. I also have a small window of clarity first thing in the morning, a few minutes after I open my eyes. This is the time when I inquire within to find solutions to problems or gently guide inspiration by bringing to my mind's eye a creative project I'm working on. I give offerings and pray for guidance. I ask my ancestors to walk with me and help me to work in a good way so that many benefit. I give offerings to the water and the land to give thanks and show gratitude for all the abundance in my life. This puts me in a peaceful state, and sometimes ideas come to me during these quiet times. Once I have an idea of what I would like to illustrate or create, that's when the work begins. I don't know if I have ever been able to fully replicate what I see in my mind's eye, but I try. And when I do, my goal is always to stay loose and trust the process. I so enjoyed working on the illustrations for Broadview. I was given a great deal of freedom, which seems to facilitate my best work. I find that overly detailed parameters limit my ability to express, and excessive edits slowly whittle away the magic in an illustration. First thought, best thought is generally the rule of thumb. Once I read the spiritual perspectives written by the contributors, ideas came quickly and easily, which always feels good. Thank you, Marcy, to the writers, Susan, Harlan, Kaylee, and Sheila for sharing so openly, and to Broadview for including me in this project.
Hi, and thank you for sharing with us, Nevada. Definitely, I sense that there's you created a good connection, and I think the words from the writers truly did inspire you in the art pieces.
Mhm.
But I'm sure this group has a lot of questions for you, and I'll give a few moments for people to send their questions. And while that's filtering through, I'm gonna start off some of the questions, question period for you here. On your website, you mentioned a Buddhist teaching known as the middle way as the path that guides your work. Can you explain this concept and how it supports your creative work?
Sure. It's a little bit pedestrian in a sense, because for me, the middle way is really just balance. So it means going to bed early, eating good, nutritious meals, having time in nature, having time to myself, having unstructured time. I don't like to be in a position where I go from project to project and I'm producing. It's nice to be settled and be open for ideas to come through me. So for me, the middle way, and it also means, a spiritual practice, a physical practice, being in right relationship, not just with the people in my family and my beloved, but also the people in my community. And sometimes there's work involved there, so the middle path for me is just keeping everything in harmony, keeping everything balanced so that I'm in a good place to create work. Mm-hmm.
That's excellent. I want to add on to that, and you've explained so many different concepts. But what about time? Does the concept of time have any integration into any of your work? Like the motion of time, or the just like we're talking about Buddhism and this pathway of a difference of time. I just kind of get this impression about time. Does that concept ever come to you in the art pieces as well?
Well, I mean, I guess for me, I grew up with a really strong meditation practice. I was taught to meditate I grew up living beside a reserve, and the chief of the Carr Tagish Nation, his partner was a Buddhist. And so she taught me to meditate when I was a really small child. And I guess how that question resonates with me is just creating stillness, actually space in time. That is where I get energy and insight, and it's kind of being in moments in time and also being very present, right? The present moment is so full of freedom and possibility, and the future is often affiliated with anxiety and kind of fearing what might happen. And the past is sometimes filled with a little bit of regret, but the present moment is so free and so full of potential. So I guess for time-wise, that's how I try and orient myself. I'm always trying to orient myself to the present moment. And that is what prayer and meditation really does, right?
We do have two questions here in the chat, and I think that it's almost like a follow-up question to I mentioned time. This comes from G. McLean. Do you surrender to God so you can be a conduit of the Spirit? That's a pretty deep question.
I do feel surrendered. I do feel surrendered. That's what I mean when I say I'm more of a vessel for creativity than a source. I don't think stuff comes from me. And sometimes it's hard. It's hard to communicate what comes through. It requires some actual bravery. And then the other thing is, sometimes I create something and I'm delighted by it, and it seems, I love it. It seems so great. And then sometimes I create things that I don't love so much and they feel like failures. But being a conduit means that I'm not so attached to what comes out. If it's good, great. If it's bad, great. And I think that is one of the that's what being connected to spirit does. It kind of frees you in that way.
Excellent. Just to continue on with the questions here, we do have another question here. How did how did you approach multiple stories, and this is in particular to what we gave you for Broadview here, that were quite different, but still managed to tie them all together visually?
Mhm. That was, that was from another place. That wasn't me. I didn't do anything intentional there. I read all the stories and I read them a couple times, and then I just waited. That's what I do. I just waited for images to come into my mind. That idea that I wake up in the morning and I have this little window of time, that is a real thing that I do every single day. I wake up in the morning and I have this time, a few minutes where I have utmost clarity. I'm completely unencumbered by thought. I'm just wide open, and I see things almost like slides. I get visions and images that come into my head, and then I write them down. I write them down. I'm like, oh, that was good. That was a good one. So that's what I mean. It doesn't really seem to come from me so much. So all the stories were kind of milling around in my mind, and the images that came out, I just trusted them. I just trusted them.
That sounds very beautiful. I like that. You just trusted them. That's very very Indigenous in my opinion. One more question here. What Indigenous art styles influence and shape your work? Or are there other artists that you kind of actually follow as well, that you kind of help kind of guide you or mentor you into some conception of style?
Oh, so many. But there is, the Inuit printmakers, those beautiful Inuit kind of folk looking prints that they make, folk art I just lack language to describe them, because they're images that are often really seem very simplified, but they're not. They're so sophisticated. The images that those Inuit printmakers make. And I wish I could remember the name of the printmaking studio where a lot of those images come from. It's quite famous and it's been around for a long, long time. They have produced a huge body of work. And so I love those prints. But then I'm so lucky. I'm at Emily Carr, and I'm right now in the Aboriginal gathering place. I wish I could show you all this place. It's got a huge totem pole on one end and another one on another that are meant to be raised soon. It's got furs and tanned hides and beads. It smells so good in here. And there's so many events that come through here. I just was working at an art auction where Dempsey Bob, who's a very famous carver, Tlingit carver, came and gave a talk that really moved me to tears, and I wasn't alone. So I love it all. I love the carvers. I love the beaders. I love beadwork. Gregory Schofield is an incredible Métis beader whose work that I love. Christy Belcourt is a Métis painter whose work is just mind-blowing. She creates all these beautiful paintings based off of the plants that she works with on the land. I could go on and on. There's so many.
Well, I'm going to combine two last questions into one that we have in a chat here, and you can answer it anyway. But how do you feel your art reflects your social activism and contribute to reconciliation?
How does my art reflect my social activism? Well, first of all, I follow my heart to projects. So for instance, I'll work with the Suzuki Foundation in Canada. They do a lot of climate justice work. Or I'm actually working with a woman in London, England right now. She's a PhD that she studied housing displacement and gentrification in London. So I'm creating a bunch of portraits for her that illustrate her research. So that will be an exhibit on housing displacement in that area. So those are two projects. And then I'm working on a book project of Métis portraits, elders, artists, and activists in the Métis community. And that project is growing in its scope. So I kind of follow my heart from project to project, and that's what guides me. And I really feel like the Métis portraits are working towards this idea of reconciliation. The portraits of the elders, artists, and activists, it's going to be a book and it will be distributed to schools and libraries across Canada. It's these visual portraits that show not just a physical representation of someone, but actually all of their interests, their spiritual practices, their connections to the land and family. So there could be plants around them, there could be animals, totems, symbols, sweetgrass. But when you look at these portraits, you really see who they are. And I think that's so important. Speaking from my nation, from the Métis Nation, there's a lot of misunderstanding of who Métis people are. And so for me, those portraits are working towards reconciliation because they're communicating our identity. And hopefully people feel more connected to us. And there's essentially just more understanding and love and acceptance. Yeah, and appreciation.
Thank you so much, Nevada. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nevada. It's just wonderful. And I love to hear all about your connection to land and how that inspires you. And that kind of segues nicely into our next speaker presenter this evening, who is Susan Nerberg. And she is a Sami writer and editor in Montreal, who writes about science, the environment, architecture, and human rights. And for our September issue, Susan returned to the land of her ancestors in Northern Europe to confront colonial trauma and reclaim her Sami identity. So please, everyone, join me in welcoming Susan.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Borreaket mun nammalea herulfasunna jamun lean merra sapmelash. Good evening. My name is Herulfasunna, aka Susan Nerberg, and I'm coastal Sami. My roots are in northern Norway, but I live in Tiohtià:ke or Montreal, which makes me both indigenous and a settler. Herulfasunna is my Sami name in simplified form. In traditional Sami culture, your name honors your relations, your great-grandparents, grandparents, and parents. It tells other people where you come from and who you belong to. If I were in the geographic area where my father's father was from, I might want to signal my belonging to my grandfather's side of the family, because that's how locals there would have been able to place or identify me. In that case, my name would be something like Andelydian Herulfasunna. Reflecting my grandmother's side, on the other hand, my name would be Ovlasigga Herulfasunna. But most Sami people today have names that reflect the dominant colonial culture. For my family, that's the majority Norwegian society, with my grandparents, father, and aunts and uncles all having been given Norwegian names. I tell you this because for me, the whole process of decolonizing is related to naming. It's tied to self-identification as Sami and as indigenous. This might seem obvious in general, but I can't speak for anyone else. 2.5 years ago, I had no idea about Sami naming conventions. I didn't know anything about official assimilation policies in Norway, or the sorrow many people feel today because they've been robbed of their language and culture as a result of Norwegianization. But more than figuring out my Sami name, the journey I'm on is about naming what has not been voiced for at least 2 generations in my family's case. It's about putting words to what has been unspoken. For me, to identify as Indigenous comes with responsibility. My grandparents were denied their natural voice. In learning and writing about their experience, I am breaking their forced silence. I can understand why they chose to bury their ethnicity, because as my grandmother told my father and my cousin Karina, nothing good came from speaking or being Sami. I think my ancestors would understand and support my decision to speak up. To write is to reclaim. At the same time, to write is also to give back. but it hasn't been easy. I've worried a lot that I would be looked at as an imposter. I've worried that I would be seen by Indigenous and non-Indigenous people alike as someone trying to hitch a ride on the current wave of recognition and amplification of Indigenous realities and voices. Here in Canada, there's been a lot of debate in the past few years about pretendians and pretendianism. And me being light-skinned and white-coated, I grew up in southern Sweden after all, I've worried I too would be seen as a non-Indigenous person falsely claiming Indigenous ancestry. But after my story came out in Broadview's September issue, I've relegated most of those concerns to the past. My people have claimed me as I have claimed my Sami and Indigenous identity. I want to finish with an update to the story I wrote in Broadview. This past summer, I returned to Sapmi, our traditional territory. I spent 5 weeks there, traveling to some of the fjords where my ancestors lived. And the best part was that I got to spend time there with my dad. On the day that we met up in the city of Tromsø, I gave him a cap with the Sami flag, thinking or hoping he would put it on right away. He looked at it and said, "Nice. I'll use it when I'm back in Cuba." Then he put it away. But as we traveled and he learned more about colonial erasure and Sami revival, he changed his mind. On one day, after arriving in his hometown of Mehamn, which is still very Norwegianized, he put the hat on. Since then, he's been wearing it every day. I'm very proud of him for finding the courage and perhaps just enough of rage to start freeing his mind of the colonial shackles. I should add also that he just turned 80 in August. It's never too late. To write is to reclaim. It's also about giving back. Kiitos, thank you for listening. Thank you for reading. And kiitos to Broadview for letting me have this voice.
Well, thank you also to you, Susan. That is very moving what you've just shared with us, especially about your dad and wearing the hat. And I know that you're also wearing a Sami shawl. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? And I want to, while we're talking about your shawl, encourage people. Chloe will put the instructions up, but if you have a question, you can toggle right on the bottom part where it probably says, everyone toggle to my name and send the questions directly to me. But let's hear about your shawl.
Yeah. So the shawl is a very traditional garment for Sami women. It's been worn for, I don't know, I mean, I've looked at photographs that are taken 100 and something years ago, and they're wearing them with the same pattern. And I don't know exactly where the pattern came from. There's always been a lot of trade between Sami people and the rest of Europe. So it could be that there's some kind of connection with Scotland or somewhere. My cousin Karina would probably know. She's also an art historian. So it comes in different colors. It's not really tied to where you're from. Usually people will choose a color that fits with their gakti, which is the traditional dress. And this here is the risku. This one is from my grandmother, and it represents the sun. So it's often used with this kind of shawl or with a silk shawl that is more worn for sort of fancy occasions.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. We have a question from Elise, and she wants to know what the current state of the Sami language is. Is it at risk like some of the Indigenous languages in this country?
I think it's fair to say that all Sami languages are endangered, although North Sami, which is the Sami language spoken that my grandmother and my grandparents would have spoken, is less in danger. There are, I don't know exactly how many, but there are thousands of people speaking North Sami, whereas South Sami or East Sami, Skolt Sami, there are maybe only 200 fluent speakers left. So it's very critical at the moment with one of the challenges I'm more familiar with the Norwegian side. So one of the challenges there is that there's a lack of teachers. And that means that children born into Sami families in southern Norway, for instance, are having a harder time getting the language instruction they need to be able to keep the language alive.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. The next question is from Christy, who was your editor on this piece. And yeah. So she says that you mentioned that the Sami people claimed you after your story was published. And she says, you know, how did that happen? And what have been some of the more meaningful messages or connections since that story was published?
I think they claimed me when I was there. So when I was traveling around and I was meeting with people, I think people just felt that I was sincere. They connected with me, and yeah, they said, of course you're Sami. They told them that I had these concerns, and that was one of the things that I had discussed with Christy also as we were going through, even before I traveled the first time, like, what if they don't accept me? And I had all these worries, and when I got there, that wasn't the case. They just said, yeah, you're one of us. It's clear you're Sami. You look Sami. You're always late. Well, obviously you're Sami, they said. So that was a bit of a joke, but sort of half joke. No, so it was it was just, I think people felt comfortable with me, and they just kind of adopted me and made me feel like I was really part of the Sami community, and I'm also Sami. And it was very important for me to feel that recognition, especially living so far away from Sápmi.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there is another question here, actually, is whether the Sami culture is matrilineal, and somebody asking that whether women herd their own family reindeer. Is that part of, can you explain a little bit about that?
Well, in my case, I don't know exactly what the sort of tradition is. I think it's matrilineal, but that actually I'm not 100% sure. And the reason for that is that in my case, my Sami heritage is thanks to my father. It's my father's side. He's the one who, so it's a bit different, I guess. And then with reindeer, my family's 90% coastal Sami or sea Sami, with only one branch farther back in history being reindeer herders. So I don't know a lot of, I'm focusing more on learning about and reclaiming coastal Sami culture and ways of being and thinking in terms of the coast and the sea and the land around the sea. So the reindeer herding aspect is a chapter that I need to learn more about, because reindeer have always been the backbone of the culture, even before it became herding. People have always been hunting reindeer. That has sustained people for millennia.
Yeah, and we need to keep in mind that you've been on this journey, you said 2.5 years, and so you're learning as you go and reconnecting, and so we don't expect you to be an expert, but I'm sure you know more than many people who are here. Cecile has asked, she said she seems to remember that the Lutheran Church is making an apology to Sami people. Can you talk a little bit about the reconciliation process with Norway and how that's moving along, if it's moving along?
Yeah, so Norway is the country that has made more important strides, and they've actually advanced in their reconciliation process. So right now, the Commission has done thousands of interviews with people about their experiences, and they're in the process now of writing out reports that I think they're coming out next year, if I'm not mistaken. So that's happened on the Norwegian side. On the Swedish side, there has been a decision to start a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but it hasn't started yet. And I think it's the same in Finland. It's in very early stages. So Canada is far ahead when it comes to any of the Nordic countries, the 3 Nordic countries.
Interesting.
Yeah.
We have a question from Eric, who wants to know to what extent the Sami traditional lifestyles and reindeer herding is threatened by climate change.
Reindeer herding is definitely threatened by climate change, because one of the problems that's happening now is that there's a lot more rain as a result of climate change in winter. That didn't used to happen before. When it rains and then freezes, you get a layer of ice on the ground. So that's covering the lichen. So the reindeer can't get to the lichen. This has forced the reindeer herders to buy commercial feed and feed them. So it's becoming very, very expensive. And the question is, what is the economic sustainability of that? And the potential for people to actually keep herding. And this is important for all Sami, regardless of whether they're reindeer herders or not, because reindeer herders have been able to maintain a lot of the culture that for coastal Sami, for instance, have been lost, because coastal Sami not having reindeer were easier to assimilate. So it's very important for reindeer herders to be able to keep the tradition alive, because that also keeps our culture alive. So it's very tied to, but yes, climate change is definitely a threat to reindeer and therefore to the survival of Sami culture.
And what about the permafrost? Is that also, I know it's a very big issue for Inuit people. Is it a similar issue?
It's not as big an
So
issue.
is it also similar?
No, because the extent of permafrost is so limited in northern Norway, Sweden, and Finland. There are pockets of permafrost. It's not at all like in the Western Arctic, for instance, where you have massive ice sheets under the ground, and when that ice melts, the whole ground collapses, and that's a threat. But in northern Scandinavia and Finland, you don't have the same permafrost.
Okay.
The ground is just different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another question from Alan, who is wondering if the Sami have known similar kinds of residential school experiences as Canadian Indigenous peoples. Was there a residential school system?
Yes, in Norway, there was a residential school system that started, I think, mid to late 1800s. And my grandmother was sent to a residential school, and she has told my father and again my cousin who had an opportunity to speak with her about these things before she died, and it was not a good experience. I mean, my grandmother was maybe 5 or 6 years old when she was sent there. She didn't speak a word of Norwegian. They were forced to only speak Norwegian, even though they didn't know how to. So when they did speak, they were sent to a cold and dark cellar or basement.
Yeah.
So but she came back. I have never read that anyone should have died in a residential school in Norway. There was definitely physical and mental abuse. So there are parallels. But I think the enormity of it is a different scale.
Well, I follow you on Facebook, and not too long ago, you posted a beautiful photo of yourself. You're wearing the same shawl you're wearing this evening, I think, and you look extremely joyful. And in the text you wrote, "Yes, this is me shouting out, showing you I am Sami. No one will take that away from my branch of the family tree again." And that moved me so much. And so I just want to thank you so much, Susan, for being here and sharing with the whole group this journey. It's so personal and it's so relatable. And I just want to thank you so very much. And I'm going to send it back to Murray, but thank you again.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Susan. And a beautiful shawl. I'm sure that the shawl has many stories and many gifts to storytell as well. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'd like to carry on to our next presenter and speaker this evening, and it's actually kind of correlates to what Susan had kind of ended on talking about the topics of residential schools. Tonight we have Reverend David Kim Craig, and he's a United Church minister at St. Matthew's United in Richmond Hill, Ontario, who is committed to intercultural worship and has worked hard as a minister to eliminate stigma against sexual and gender diversity in the church. David also holds a PhD in history. In our September issue, David tackled the difficult question of how the United Church got into the business of residential schools. And he found some of the answers in Broadview's predecessor publication, The Christian Guardian. Please join me in welcoming David Kim Craig. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Murray. I'd like to try to introduce myself in Nehewewen. Kakiao Kitatenawao, David Kim Craig Nitsigason, Sudbury, Ontario, Kayate Ochinia. I am Yewianunia Oma. I'm a minister, like Murray said. Kiskinwa ma keo, ekwa kiskinwa magan nioma. So I'm an instructor, but also a student, and I really think those two go together. And certainly with this article that I wrote, I found I was learning so much. It was a great blessing. So Anoch Mio Kisikao. It's a beautiful day, Nina Naskumon. I'm very grateful to be part of what's going on here today. So thank you for having me. When I got the assignment, I guess, if you will, I was asked, Jocelyn reached out and asked if I might be interested in doing an article on how the United Church got into residential schools. And the question seemed to beg a beginning, some kind of story about a beginning. How did it all get started? And it was a good question. Like I needed to learn a lot more about that, and so I was very eager to get digging in and to find out a little bit more about how the United Church got into residential schools. So I started my search, but the search for beginning for residential schools is tricky. And I got to thinking, the search for beginnings in general can be tricky. And as historians, we try and find a good starting point, but it's always a little bit arbitrary, you could often start at a different place than you actually do. So I was thinking, I landed on the beginning of the Cornerstone Laying ceremony for Mount Elgin Indian Industrial School. But I could have started earlier. I could have gone to the promulgation of the doctrine of discovery. I could have gone even farther back to the beginning of Christendom with Emperor Constantine. I also could have started later. I could have started at Confederation, or the passing of the Indian Act, which really started to implement the actual residential school policy that was in place in Canada for years and years. And I could have started at the beginning of the United Church. Like when the United Church started, why did it keep those schools running when it knew that they were bad news when they got it, right? So there was all kinds of other places where I could have started, but I landed on Mount Elgin Industrial School. And there was a couple of reasons for that. The first reason was that the Christian Guardian, which is the predecessor, as you mentioned, of Broadview, the longest English language, continuously published English language publication in North America. The Christian Guardian had an excellent article about this event that happened, the cornerstone laying of this school. And at this cornerstone laying, we have a whole bunch of, well, we have all the players there. We have the Crown. We have the Canadian government. It wasn't, Canada was still a colony at the time, but we've got, they're starting to think in terms of nationhood. We've got the church, of course, and we've got the Indigenous community. And each of those players are represented, and each of those players has agency in it, especially the Indigenous community. The Indigenous community is there en masse. They're taking an active part in this event. What's happening is being translated into Anishinaabe, and there's a feast afterwards. So in a way, this was the ideal place to start, because it doesn't, there are no villains here yet. There are no heroes here yet. There's just a community with a project that they're working on together. And we know that the history of that goes bad. But if that's the beginning place, then that's also maybe a good place to try and get back to. So I thought, you know, maybe this is a good place to land. It's an incredible article in the July 17th, 1949, July 25th, 1949 edition of the Christian Guardian. It paints a wonderful picture. And one of the things that really moved me was a quote that was placed in the article to kind of to ground what was happening in a Christian scripture. And the quote was from Proverbs 19, verse 2. And it said, "For the soul to be without knowledge is not good." For the soul to be without knowledge is not good. And of course, that quote was put there with the intention of promoting the educational mission, if you will, to Indigenous people. It was put there on the part of the Christian editors to kind of say, look, the Bible condones and supports what we're doing here. But for me, when I read that, it had such irony, such a double meaning, because it seemed to speak directly to me. And it wasn't that I needed to go out and educate other people. It was more of a, oh my goodness, you know, at this point in my life, it's me that needs to be educated. And it's the church that needs to be educated. And that our souls are thirsting for more knowledge about what happened in residential schools, why that matters to us, and how we can use that knowledge to help us as medicine in our journey towards reconciliation. And so that's a little bit of my journey in writing the article, which you know, the journey hasn't ended yet. I'm just very grateful to be here again. So maybe if I've said enough, I'll turn it back over to you.
Oh, for sure. Thank you, David. Great insight, and thank you so much. And I do know we do have like one or two questions here in the chat that have been filtering through, and I'll just go to the chat if you don't mind. I did get a question here, a little bit of a scenario. The Ontario churches seem to have started the residential schools with good intentions and in full cooperation with the Indigenous peoples. However, it soon took a wrong turn. How do you respond to people who say, we started with good intentions, so you can't blame us for the outcome?
Thanks for that question. You know, there's two wolves, right, in our hearts. A good one and a bad one, and whichever one you feed is the one that will kind of take over. And unfortunately, both those wolves were very much there at the beginning. So you can't say it was only the good wolf that was there. It was the bad wolf was there too. But the problem was the bad wolf got fed a whole lot more. And so you can't back out of it by saying, well, the good wolf was there, but yeah, it was, why did we feed the bad wolf, right? There were a lot of settler attitudes that were layered on top of that event and around it and permeating it. And although on the surface there was good things happening, there were possibilities there. Those settler attitudes, they over time they just won the day, and that's on us. So there's no assuaging of guilty consciences with that story, I don't think.
For sure. I want to go back to the to the article, and you mentioned about the publication in the Christian Guardian, and it was Methodist publication from 1829 to 1925. From this, is there more Indigenous history to be mined from that particular publication that you bring up from your references to the article?
Thank you for that incredibly awesome question. There's tons to get out of the Christian Guardian. There were a number of Indigenous contributors to the publication. It was a paper at the time. Egerson Ryerson even brought on some Indigenous editors to help with the publication. And what you discover as you read those contributions from Indigenous contributors is that they've got a very different perspective, even from their settler missionary colleagues with whom they're working very, very closely. So we get a wonderful picture of Indigenous communities, of Indigenous leadership, and also of hints of an Indigenous approach to Christianity that is not towing the settler line. It's a Christianity that respects Indigenous ways, Indigenous identities, Indigenous language, and wants very much to promote those things. Whereas on the other side, the settler missionaries were thinking all that had to disappear. But all that's you can get a really good picture of that just by reading the Christian Guardian, especially the earlier years.
Great. And I want to move a little bit into a different scenario and where, David, I want you to put on your reverend cap and speak as a settler who's a reverend. And one of the questions I have here in the chat is, we spent a lot of time in the past decade looking back, and how do we see our churches contributing to reconciliation in a meaningful way going forward?
Well, thank you for the question. One of the great gifts that the article gave me, the opportunity to work on it, was to develop a knowledge about events in the past that I could share with the congregation in a way that helps us move forward. And I really think that being able to tell an honest, authentic story about things that have happened in the past is a very key element for moving forward. But the other thing that I would say, right off the bat, we have a new moderator. The first Indigenous woman to be moderator of the church, our second Indigenous moderator. That's something to celebrate, right? And so celebrate that. And I think that is celebration as what's happening now. The motions in the last General Council towards creating an independent Indigenous church. These are tangible steps to something new. So let's get on board. Let's cheerlead. Let's get involved and celebrate, as well as look back and take ownership of what's been sad in the past.
Well, I want to thank you, David, for spending this time with us and answering a few of our questions here tonight. And I'd just like to thank you for contributing and giving some truth and honesty, and I think that's where we need to go as people walking in great relations together. But thank you, David, for spending your time here tonight.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, David, and hopefully we can continue to mine this history together with an eye to moving forward with truth first and then reconciliation. David's story about residential schools is perhaps a perfect segue into our short documentary about Andrew Reuben, a residential school survivor who now lives in Marysville, Ontario, and he is working to preserve the Cree language. Andrew is with us this evening, along with the director of the video, who is journalist Alexandra Shimo. Videographer Lindsay Sarazin was unable to join us tonight. So hopefully our technical abilities don't fail us. We're going to watch the video now. It's about 7 minutes, and it's called Dreaming in Cree. So Chloe, let's play the video.
All right.
My name is Andrew Reuben. My Cree name is Jocelyn Bell. I am what do you call Winnebago Muskego Ininu in Cree. Born in a place called Musini. I grew up probably in a traditional way, I would call it. My language was my mother introduced to me, which was Cree. Well, my mom was a residential school survivor. She's Ojibwe from Brunswick House, First Nation. My dad was Cree from Saskatchewan in the west coast of James Bay. I was picked up by Children's Aid, the 60s school, and then placed in residential schools. At that time, in 1963, I was 13 years old. I think the way that I could best explain or maybe share is that it was like going into a prison, because you were taken into this fenced-in place. A big building with a big fence and locked to go in. So it was like that. It was like an imprisonment thing. And the first thing that they did to us boys anyway, actually I can't speak for my two sisters, were to cut off our hair, took all our clothing away, and told us never to speak your language. Like they would say, your parents don't love you, your grandparents don't love you, your aunts and uncles don't love you. That's why you're here. The dreaming in Cree really saved my life. When I was about 5, 6 years old, I was prepared to seek my vision. And it was done in the bush, we call it Bagadaskam. And did that vision dream quest, I would call it. I saw my own future. You know, that was very young to begin to understand that I would be a healer in a sense, and to begin to use that language in a healing way. Well, we were asked to come to a gathering in Ottawa. And while there, even prior to that, I wasn't, I know my energy level was kind of low, I felt, you know, and I thought maybe it was coming down off the floor or something like that. Called my colleague and I said, I can't make it because, you know, I need to go home because I'm not well. And I ended up in Emerge. And surgeon there, Dr. Hovka, mentioned that I needed to sign something that my chance of survival would be 50-50 or something like that. Anyway, so they did surgery overnight. I got up and they told me I had 3rd stage cancer in my colon. And I said, oh, okay. But they took it out, put me back together, and said, okay, you know, we've done it, and it's time to heal. I think what happened to me was my mind shifted. It's really shifted to a level of more understanding and seeing things differently and feeling things differently. I tell my staff when I first started, we got to bring that language back. And that's what we're doing with Zoom now. We're bringing back and teaching that language. I find that if I start to introduce my language to my children, I have to do it more and more. The word sacred is the word I use to explain what shared life means to us, meaning Bagadaskam and everything that's in it, from the ground to the air to the water to everything. There is that understanding of humanism's responsibility in making sure that everything is balanced. When people mention Bagadaskam, the word I use in English would be nature. But for us, everything that we see or come to understand in Bagadaskam, there's a reason for it, right? There's a reason for it. So it's really, I think for us, it's a complete understanding of why we're living on this, a ski, right? And if you don't understand that, you can abuse it and you can destroy it. So then that creed and that language that we speak about, you know, it's important to retain that language. It'll give you that sense of being, your role, your identity, your name, why it's important for people to understand, maybe for the very first time, what we're all about. Let's put it this way, Cree is the foundation of renewal.
Okay, and we're back. So thank you, Andrew, for sharing your story, and Alexandra for your research and direction on that. It's just such a moving video, and I've watched it many times, but it always touches me in different ways when I see it. So thank you very much. I think we should invite Alex and Andrew to talk a little bit about how this video came to be. So welcome.
Thank you. My thing is quite short, so is it possible I can go first? Because I
Go for it.
Okay, so I actually met Andrew about a decade ago in 2012. I was working on a book project at that time, and he's a pretty inspiring guy. There is a way, he has a kind of some people have an emotional resonance and a depth that really comes across. And he just knew a lot about Cree mythology or Cree, the language, the linguistics, the history. He just was this like wealth of knowledge. And I had been kind of using some online Cree resources and other books, but it didn't have the depth that I needed. So Andrew was basically working as a translator for me on this book, and he would help me unpack some of the ideology behind the vocabulary. And as I kind of learned more of this vocabulary, I really thought that there was this kind of a whole new world, a new way of thinking about things, a new perspective. It was new to me, but it was actually very ancient. And I think that this way of seeing was just really different to the post-industrial capitalist information age that I generally live in, or that we live in North America. And so those words, like, I'm just going to say a couple of them. Andrew can tell you a lot more, and probably will tell you a lot more. One of them, Matawaso, it means a person who's gone through great difficulties and gained wisdom as a result. I thought that was like the best word. Or Ayamu Mushtik means the spirit is talking through the person holding the talking stick, and people need to pay attention because what is coming out really needs to be said. Anyway, so he was telling me all these things, and a lot of this material obviously some of it ended up in the book, but a lot of it didn't. And I thought, this is so enchanting. One day I'm going to make a story about this. And then years went by, and 10 years later, Jocelyn was like, we're doing this Indigenous special. And so I was like, would you be interested in making a video? And I thought, yes, but I'm not sure I can. And then I met Lindsay de Sarrazin from Golden Lake First Nation, or Pikwakanagan First Nation. And he had a lot of experience. So once I was partnered with him, I knew that it would be possible. I was in really good hands, and we'd be able to capture a little bit about this different way of seeing the world. Anyway, that's my spiel, a short spiel. Andrew, I'm sure you have a lot more to say. Andrew?
Miigwech. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Miigwech. Miigwech, Alexandra. Ibeti Maskot Betiga Goethe came in Gigonkan. Nidimidaga Sketaman. Nest Gandesho Bataman. Nigani Dabinan. Thanks, Alexander, for coming to my home here and videotaping something. And this is my first time seeing it today. My wife is more excited than me about it. But my way of trying to communicate, because I'm Cree, I think Cree, I was born Cree. And I want to translate into the English language or the French language, whatever language, that makes more sense, I think. More sense in terms of the history of us. You know, this is the only place we have here, North America. And my grandpa was Métis. Métis is kind of hard to explain in the English language. It can mean many things. And he taught me lots when I was a young kid. Maybe I was very young, you know, up until maybe 70 years old, which kind of set in me my purpose and my role as a man, to be able to translate for once our history, our old history, and begin this way by using language. I'm more happy when I speak my language. I'm like it was said that I'm a survivor. I'm also survived a serious sickness. I didn't know at the time, but I don't think about it. But what I believe as to why I'm here is to really come around to use technology to try and explain what's in my head, in my mind, and why am I still here after all my past. So the future for me then is to be able to try and be able to express these different ways of understanding. I respect everybody. I respect everything that came to this country. But I think respect's got to go both ways. And I think if you want to really come to understand, learn my language. Learn my language. It's kind of when you I think it would be better understood if it was me translating into the English language without reference to anything that was bought here, but referencing the things that I want to say about life, about the concept of our God, the idea of Bhagavatam, and all of the ceremonial things that I don't talk too much about, but there are many. But four basic ones. Milteven, Atalakan, Shabbaton, Shabbatega. Those are the four the major ones. In addition, of course, to your bundle and what you have in your bundle and all that. When it can when it can we thought when it can the gagan is the taki on which I go. Kamelash in Mascots. Dinanum sway. Chiambiak. Kumagishi when Kashikiskentum. Maybe it's important now to really understand the things that I want to really talk about and share about this humanness that we all have as humans. I don't want to use the word spirituality too much. And I know Alexander reminds me it's an adjective maybe or something like that in English. But for me, I think the word sacredness and the importance of understanding why sacredness in the English language would be used is that everything that you see and hear are sacred. Doesn't matter where it comes from. It could be the air, water, land, and anywhere else. It's an amazing world view that's been around on this part of the world for centuries, centuries, centuries and centuries. But when technology started to happen here, like a radio, TV, old guys, elders used to say, we did that. We know about it. But we had a system in our ways, in this human body, system way to be able to turn on that knob, as you do in radio or TV today. But the system that was to turn on that way was in here. So you had to be really trained in preparing yourself through sweat for example, or fasting, these kind of things that prepares you to be able to do that. Now, only older people can do it. Elders like me, I'm 72, going on 73. My dad used to tell me I'm still a young guy, I don't know anything yet. And I know what he meant. So all these things that I'm trying to, tell Alexander about, maybe using this way of communicating and being able to express things in my language and be able to translate it properly, might be the way of saving ourselves. Because we must is an English language. We must the rough translation of that is the color of the bark that's speaking. They cut the tree, the inside of the tree, the bark inside of the tree, it's speaking. That's what Wemistegushi means. So we had no thing about color. So we said, well, this person is the color of this tree and he's speaking that language, right? But it's not a tree language as we know. Something like that, right? So a lot of clarification, I think, will come about when somebody understands the language and be able to think in that language. Because a lot of people can't interpret or translate, a Cree thought, Cree vision, Cree dream. That'll make sense to people who are not familiar with the language and how that comes about.
Andrew, sorry, I want to make sure that there's a little bit of time for questions, but we're running short a little bit. But one question that I had, in the video you talked about, you said dreaming in Cree saved my life. Can you tell us maybe briefly, just what were those dreams? They were in Cree. What do you remember about those dreams that saved your life?
Well, I was in Brantford a few years ago. Someone asked me, how did I manage to keep my language? I never really thought about it. So I said, when I sleep, I dream in Cree. I understand, and nobody can touch that. Nobody can say, Andrew, stop it. Or you can't do that. You can't dream like that. It's all mine. It's all me. And I believe that. That's because it comes from my grandpa. So that's how and that's why I say I'm happy when I speak my language, because the visions and dreams are very important to understand, because without them you can't be who you are. And but it was tough to do, It was very tough to be physically abused, mentally abused, languagely abused, sexually abused, and all that. I thought I had it bad, but no, it was worse with other people. So that then, made me I'm fortunate because I got that knowledge from my grandpa when I was very, very young. And that's what, basically that's what's, because I believed in it, and I didn't think that he was, he'd be lying to me or anything like that. So I listened to that. And the dreams I have are many, 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 many meanings to them, but everybody dreams. Everybody dreams in whatever language that they have or they grew up with.
Okay. You're teaching Cree to students and you're teaching Cree to your children. I'm wondering how they're coming along with their Cree.
Well, you know, these children, they have their own minds, eh? You know, they sometimes they say Andrew or Dad, you know, we can hold off on this for a while, you know. But it's difficult, you know. It's not easy to try and teach a language that for them that's theirs, you know. But time will tell, you know, and I'll just keep on doing it because I feel I need to do it more.
Yeah. Thompson Highway recently said that Cree is a laughing language and he thinks it's funnier than English. Do you agree with that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say a laughing language. I would say a humorous language.
Okay, good.
It's humorous that's really important, you know, because it releases a lot of things, you know, when somebody's going through difficult times, you know. So yeah, sometimes when we get together, when we were out working, we take a break, you know, we were in a restaurant and we were laughing and having a good time. And people around us were thinking maybe we're teasing them, right? But, you know, got nothing to talk to them about, you know. Do it to them, you know. It was all about us. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, thank you again for agreeing to be part of the video and for being here this evening. And also, Alexandra, thank you so much for liaising and making it all happen and bringing this wonderful human into our sphere. And we just have so much gratitude for both of you. So thank you very much.
Good.
Yes, and thank you so much, Alex and Andrew. You know, Andrew, I like Jocelyn. I've watched that video over various times, and every time I watch it, I get another inspiration, and myself too, wanting to retrace my Cree language. I know it's so hard, you know, because you want to speak it so badly and you want to know you could understand, but you can't fully speak it. So I always, you're an inspiration, Andrew, and I wants to pull me back into this, into knowing my language as well. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody. But before we wrap up for this evening, Jocelyn invited me to share a few of my own thoughts about the experience of guest editing this issue of Broadview. And, you know, I had a little bit of heart-to-heart with myself before joining in this video to kind of, you know, come up with some good, clear thoughts and from my heart, and put the two together to, you know, to how do I describe this? Like this experience was a surprise to me when Jocelyn first asked me, and then it just made me feel this great joy to be able to put together and support these stories of all our Indigenous peoples from across this great land. Many people from different generations, many people like Susan, you know, and her story. You know, her story was probably one of the first stories that I saw that Jocelyn, you know, showed me, and I was so like, wow, I gotta see these pictures. I gotta, you know, I want to talk more with her. All these things. It just, you know, this art of storytelling for me, and that's my roots. You know, my background is also within theater and drama and the arts, but I pull that into this idea of storytelling, like our Cree roots. You know, we sit around, we tell each other stories, we talk, we laugh, we express ourselves, and we do it in different ways because we live in two worlds. Like many of us who are, you know, Indigenous, who are urbanized, we live in two worlds, and I can even talk about that with you know, teachings of my grandmother. She taught us to live in two worlds because we had to. And we had to learn to adapt to be able to be part of society, to have good relations with our neighbors. You know, you know, that's part of storytelling too. And it's just the action. But, for me, it really comes down to like the expression askik, all the world, all of us together. Like, it's not just one people's stories. We all live in this world, and we have to be reminded of that we all have the ability, and we all have, I always feel we have the responsibility to share our stories together, because that's a part of it, is like we need to, in order to this act of survival, but this self-expression, we need to be able to be together in so many various ways, and storytelling is one of them. And to pass those on, whether it's through literature, through books, through visual art, dance, our languages, it's all storytelling. It's all back to what we as Indigenous people talk about, is the languages back to the land, to who we are, to what's below our feet, our great mother here. And we're one race. That's my expression to all this. And we're all humankind. And really, when we get into storytelling, we lose a lot of those borders, and we can come together and share in that self-expression. And that's what brings me the joy when Jocelyn asked me about doing this Broadview magazine. I know there's a lot of thoughts in there all at once, but that's my expression of joy. That knowing that we can storytell together. Unfortunately, though, this brings us to the end of our program, and I like to thank so much to all of you for being here tonight. And thank you especially to Nevada Lynn, Suzanne Newberg, David Kim Craig, Alexandra Schimmo, and Andrew Reuben, who volunteered their time to make this event possible for us. And just wow. And I'm very humbled tonight, walking this path with Jocelyn and Broadview and everyone here, and we're very grateful to you.
Yeah, and thank you, Murray. And I would also just like to add my thanks to Chloe Tejada for providing our tech support, and also to Allison Tedford, who helped us promote and plan tonight's event. I also need to add that I'm grateful to Ontario Creates, which provided us a grant to help fund the Indigenous Vision issue, the short documentary about Andrew Reuben, and this symposium. And last but not least, thank you, Murray, for being such an insightful, gracious, and generous guest editor. It's been such an honor to work with you, and I look forward to our continued friendship and collaboration. And I learned today that Murray is going to join Broadview's board of directors, so that's exciting. And we're, going to have his influence in this publication for many years to come. So that's great news. To honor our Indigenous Vision theme, our guests, and the many stories you've heard, I invite you to consider making a donation to Reconciliation Canada. Murray chose this wonderful organization as the recipient of your donations tonight. This Indigenous-led charitable organization catalyzes meaningful relationships through values-based dialogue, leadership, and action. Their vision is a vibrant, inclusive Canada where all people achieve their full potential and shared prosperity. So we'll put that, if we haven't already, put that post into the chat. Tomorrow we'll be sending you a short survey by email so you can share your thoughts about tonight's event. And we'll also include another link to Reconciliation Canada in that email. Again, if anyone is in need of support this evening following the stories that we've heard, the things that have been shared, please note the helplines in the chat space. Thank you again, everyone, for being here, especially the presenters, and be well. I hope to see you back next time for our regular online reading club, which will be on Monday, October 17th, a little later than usual to give us some space, 7 p.m. Eastern. And that's when we will discuss the October-November issue. Good night, everyone, and thank you again.
Yes, good night, and thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.